we still faithful. I'ma put it all on the table. We forever faithful. Yeah, we still faithful.
What's going on, 49er faithful? Thank you for tuning in to Keeping the Faith. I'm JD, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the upcoming 2025 NFL draft, and specifically what I feel the 49ers must do with the 11th overall selection in next week's draft. And we are officially 1 week out from the beginning of the 2025 NFL draft. And I wanted to come on and give my thoughts, my feelings on what I think the 49ers absolutely have to do, what they have to achieve, what they have to come away with in the first round of the upcoming draft. And, the title, the thumbnail, it says it all. For me, throughout this entire pre-draft run-up, the pre-draft process, whatever you want to call it, the days and weeks and months leading up to this 2025 NFL draft, there's only been one name, one player that I've had circled on my board, if you want to call it that, and that's Ole Miss defensive tackle Walter Nolen. Now, he's been, in my personal opinion, from what I've observed, from what I've seen on social media, YouTube, and whatnot, I feel like Walter Nolen is the consensus selection amongst the fan base and amongst a lot of the media. You've had guys like Matt Mayoko and others recently speculating that the 49ers may select Walter Nolen with the 11th overall pick here coming up. And for me, like I said, the entire run up to this draft, it's been Walter Nolen or bust for me, but I have reasons why. And I know I'm probably going to get some pushback, and I know that other names may, be qualified for this 11th overall pick. But for me, if they select Walter Nolen at 11th overall, it's a home run on a variety of levels, because you see, the 49ers picking at 11, you're just outside the top 10, and who knows when the next time the 49ers will be picking that high in the NFL draft, right? The Niners need to pick a guy at 11 who can be a potential star, who can be a potential, multi-time Pro Bowler, all-pro player, just key member of this 49ers team, a pillar, if you will. And I feel like Walter Nolen, he fills needs. He has the potential, the high ceiling to be that guy for the 49ers defensive line moving forward. And if you're the 49ers at 11, like I said, you have to pick a star. You can't go safe with the 11th overall pick. He may be a little rough around the edges according to some, but I don't care about that. I care about who can be a star, who can just knock it out of the park, who can wreak havoc, who can wreck a game plan on Sundays. And to me, if you combine what the 49ers need and what the 49ers have available to them in this upcoming draft, Walter Nolen is the pick. And to me, it's not close. It's not rocket science. This has been the pick for me all along, like I've mentioned. And he fills arguably, in my opinion, it's not arguable, he fills the greatest need that the 49ers have on their roster currently, and that's on the defensive line. If the 49ers were to kick off a game today, they could field an offensive line that Kyle Shanahan would feel at least competent with, would feel somewhat confident in. But if you kicked off a game today, what would the 49ers have on their defensive line? After letting go of guys like Malik Collins and Javon Hargrave and Leonard Floyd, the 49ers don't even have any semblance of a defensive line at this point. Yes, you have Nick Bosa. Yes, you're bringing back Yatir Gross-Matos. But on the interior, what do they have? Evan Anderson, who's a rotational player. Kevin Givens. They don't have anybody special on the inside. And with this draft being so deep on the defensive line, and in my opinion, very, very full of talent, particularly in the first round, the 49ers will go to this defensive line well several times in the upcoming draft, and they need to start it off with Walter Nolen. He fits the biggest need, and he's also potentially he also has potentially the highest ceiling of any defensive lineman in this draft. And that's not just according to me. you've had, anonymous NFL coaches around the league, scouts. Walter Nolen is a very popular name and a very polarizing name as we, lead up into this 2025 NFL draft. And I feel at the end of the day, he fits the 49ers' greatest need, which is defensive line. So, you know, look, a lot of people will say, what about Kenneth Grant? What about insert XYZ defensive lineman here? Walter Nolen is a three down player. Can you say that about Kenneth Grant? Because I can't. Yes, Kenneth Grant is a mammoth of a human being. I like Kenneth Grant. But at 11, do you want to draft a two down player? Or do you want to draft a guy who's going to be on the field all three downs, who can stop the run just as effectively as he can rush the passer? That's why I want Walter Nolen. Walter Nolen can do it all, and we know how the San Francisco 49ers covet defensive linemen who can rush the passer, particularly from the interior. They like all their guys on the defensive line to be able to rush the passer, and Walter Nolen can do that and then some. And he's also one of the best against the run. To me, it's just the best of both worlds. And we know how the 49ers and we know how Chris Kosurik love to coach up those defensive linemen. They want them to get after the quarterback and also be able to stop the run. Kenneth Grant, yes, while he's huge and he's a mammoth of a man and he moves well for a guy his size, I'm sorry. You can't really compare the two to me, especially when you have a guy like Kenneth Grant who's going to be coming off the field, presumably on third down. So, in my opinion, it's Walter Nolen or nothing. And you know, let's talk a little pros and cons, shall we? Let's talk a little pros and cons regarding Walter Nolen. In 2024, this is at least according to Pro Football Focus. He had an 88.9 overall grade, which is good for third highest at his position in the nation. 35 quarterback pressures in 2024, good for sixth in the nation. 13 tackles for loss or no gain, which is second overall at his position in 2024. A 91.6 run defense grade, which was second overall in the nation at his position. 6.5 sacks on the year. Come on, let's pull up these notes. Come on, there we go. He only missed 5 tackles throughout his entire collegiate career as a guy on the interior who has to stop the run, has to account for the pass, he does everything. He does everything. He only missed 5 tackles throughout his entire collegiate career, and that's extremely impressive. All SEC player in 2024, and throughout this whole process, he's been compared to Philadelphia Eagles defensive tackle Jalen Carter. Their measurables are nearly the same, somewhat the same. Even their profiles coming into this draft were a little bit eerily similar, but we'll get into that here in a moment. Nolen himself has called himself the next Aaron Donald. And if you can get the next Aaron Donald or the next Jalen Carter at 11th overall, sign me up all day. I want the next Jalen Carter. I want the next Aaron Donald on this 49ers defensive line. Now, I read you the numbers, went through my spiel of why I feel that he fits. Now, let's talk a little bit about the cons, because there are some cons. But after I list these cons, I'm going to give some pushback on why I don't really have concerns about the negatives that you're hearing about Walter Nolen as we head into this draft. Scouts have concerns about his maturity. He's been known to walk off the practice field when he's frustrated, maybe a little bit emotionally immature, maybe, I'm not going to say anger issues, but he's a guy who can be visibly frustrated and has shown that in practice and wanting to walk off the field. Maybe, maybe a little outspoken, who knows. In terms of just being on the field, he's a guy who can be down on the field a lot. He finds himself down on the ground quite a bit. And of course, if you're a defensive lineman who's down on the ground, you're not stopping the run, you're not rushing the quarterback. So that's not good. And then of course, he doesn't have a vast array, a full toolbox of pass rush moves. Okay, those are the main knocks on Walter Nolen as we head into this draft. But I have pushbacks on those things, and those are just a few of the negatives that people have talked about. I would say those are probably the most most listed, most popular, most talked about negatives when it comes to Walter Nolen. But my pushback is, look, he's 21 years old. You are you gonna what are you gonna expect maturity wise from a 21-year-old? He's 21 years old. He will grow up. He will mature, and this is where your team culture, your team chemistry, your locker room, your veteran leaders, and your coaching staff come into play. This is where you bring in a guy like Walter Nolen and you nurture him and you get him to become what you want him to become. You have all these veteran leaders on the team, the Nick Bosa's, the Fred Warners, the George Kittles, the Trent Williams. You have guys like Chris Kosurik, your defensive line coach. You brought back Robert Sala, for crying out loud. So if you're worried about a player like Walter Nolen's maturity, I'm more worried about what the Niners have in their locker room, because you should be able to bring him into your environment, bring him in to your locker room, and help coach him up, help him become a pro. I mean, he's 21. What do we expect from a 21-year-old kid? When it comes to the maturity stuff, I'm not too worried about it, because I remember me at 21 and where I am now. And, look, he's going to grow up, he's going to mature, and he's going to have the right people around him if he comes to San Francisco. At least you would hope so. Am I right? He's been compared to Jalen Carter, and people forget that Jalen Carter himself had some character concerns coming into that draft when the Eagles selected him. I believe it was 9th overall, right? So if the Philadelphia Eagles are willing to draft a guy like Jalen Carter, who, to the best of my knowledge, hasn't had any character problems or anything happen to him while he's been there in Philadelphia, why would the 49ers be afraid of drafting a guy like Walter Nolen, who may be similar in terms of character, in terms of personality, in terms of, just, being vocal or being frustrated, whatever the case may be. If it's good enough for the Philadelphia Eagles to draft a guy like Jalen Carter, why is it not good enough for the 49ers, right? If Walter Nolen lasts to the Philadelphia Eagles at the end of the first round, you can bet your bottom dollar that the Philadelphia Eagles are drafting Walter Nolen. I mean, so if it's good enough for Philly, if it's good enough for the team that just won the Super Bowl, it should be good enough for the San Francisco 49ers, in my opinion. The Eagles would not flinch to take Walter Nolen at the end of the first round if he's available. So that should tell the 49ers all that they need to know right there. And let's see, what else we got. I don't want to forget anything. Regarding him being on the ground a lot when he's on the field, and not having a ton of pass rush moves and whatnot, that all comes with technique. He's 21 years old. He will learn. He will get better. He will develop when he becomes a professional football player. And for all that we hear about Chris Kosurik and how great of a defensive line coach he is, why can't we give him a guy like Walter Nolen, who is basically the biggest ball of clay possible from a measurable standpoint, from a strength standpoint, a quickness standpoint, height, weight, speed. He checks all the boxes for the 49ers. And if you really believe in Chris Kosurik's ability to develop talent, and hey, let's not forget, they brought back Robert Sala. So if your knock on him is his technique isn't sound and he's not a finished product, he's 21. He's going to get better. That's why you draft a guy like that, 11th overall, because you're going to want to see what he does in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and beyond. It's not just about 2025. And by all accounts, with what the 49ers have been doing this offseason, are the 49ers really focused on 2025 anyway? The 49ers are looking forward to 2026, 2027, 2028 based on the moves or lack thereof that they have made this offseason. And so, bringing in a guy like Walter Nolen fits right in with that timeline. And so, why bring back Robert Sala if you're not willing to develop some young talent? Why keep talking up the greatness of Chris Kosurik if you're not going to give him the kind of guy that he can develop, right? I think Walter Nolen is absolutely the pick at 11 for the 49ers, and I don't think it's close. I really don't. And I'm curious to see what 49ers fans feel I can't wait for this NFL draft. Um, Look, I'm gonna leave it up to John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and Robert Sala and everyone else in that building to pick the right player at 11. But in my book, I feel that correct player for the 49ers at 11 is Walter Nolen at Ole Miss. Niners fans, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about Walter Nolen, and let me know who you think the 49ers should pick at 11th overall. Maybe some of the reasons that I talked here in this video may sway your opinion. Maybe not. Who knows? But leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts. Can't wait for this draft.